For today's first session, we have Jane Mepham and Jake Northrup joining us. Jane Mepham is the founder and owner of Algon Financial Advisors, a virtual fee-only registered investment advisor in Austin, Texas. Being virtual means she works with clients from all over the country. She's passed her certified financial planner exams, amongst others, making her a CFP candidate. Her firm works with foreign-born families like herself, who are citizens, green card holders, or on different visas, and has a special affinity for those in technology, which is where she started before switching to the financial planning industry. This is a second career for her after spending over 17 years in the high-tech space, most of it spent in Massachusetts. She's a keen writer and is an active contributor to the Street's Retirement Daily Next Gen column. She's been featured in other publications like Think Advisor, MSN, Money Geek, Authority Magazine, and a few others. She lives in Austin, Texas with her family after moving from the Boston area a couple years ago for warmer weather down south. When she is not on the tennis courts, you are likely to find her running the Austin roads and trails with the goal of qualifying for the Boston Marathon this year. Welcome, Jane.
Yeah.
Jake is the founder of Experience Your Wealth, a virtual fee-only financial planning firm helping travel-loving young families find the right balance between paying down debt, investing for the future, but also experiencing life now. He's a certified financial planner, chartered financial analyst, and certified student loan professional. Jake has been named to Investment News 2020 40 Under 40 class, a 2020 top financial planner for millennials by Business Insider, and a 2021 Young Advisor to Watch by Financial Advisor magazine. He's been featured in the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, CNBC, Forbes, Yahoo Finance, and other media outlets. More importantly, Jake lives in Bristol, Rhode Island, with his high-maintenance wife and dog. He and his wife are huge travel enthusiasts and recently just returned from a trip to Antarctica. Welcome, Jake, and I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to you.
Thanks, Sarah. I just love that you called my wife high maintenance too, because it's my words that I gave to you, but I can also tell her that too. It's a running joke that she's comfortable with, but well, thank you all for coming and excited to share. So I'm going to be starting off with talking about saving for your financial future, different ways that you can save, talking about some of the mindset shifts around money as well. And then I'm going to shift it over to Jane, and she's going to specifically talk through some tax planning strategies, saving when you're maybe not based in the U.S. So if you live abroad and you're here just for school or something like that too. Before diving into this, can you just confirm, are you able to see my screen okay?
Yes, we are.
Good. Okay, awesome. All right. So here's the agenda for what I'm going to go through. I'm going to aim to get it probably 25 minutes or so, and then shift it over to Jane. Again, make sure that we have enough time for questions as well. So we're first going to start with the why, right? Talking about why money is important to you, sort of setting that direction. Then we're going to get into sort of the how, get into some of the options that you have to save. What are some different vehicles? So when you think about saving for your financial future, you feel like it's important and aligned with some of the things that you want as well. So first starting with the why, I actually love this. I kind of call it like creating your financial lens, right? So if you don't know the lens that you're looking through, you're making financial decisions blind. And I tell my clients, this is by far the most important thing that you can do before you really start saving for your financial future. But it's the part that no one really does. So I find that most people start saving, but don't really know what they're saving for in the first place. So I'm going to first start with a question. I'm actually going to ask you to take about a minute or two and just jot down some answers. But the question is, and this is something that I actually ask with my clients, is I want you to imagine that you are totally financially secure, right? So you have enough money for now and in the future. You never have to worry about working again if you didn't want to. The question is, what would you want to do with your money? What would you do with your life? What would you change? What would that look like? So again, I want you to take like a minute or two, just jot down some answers, and then we'll talk through just why it's important, and also share some of mine as well. But this is a cool question. It kind of steps you out of the mindset of having to work, and then says, if you didn't have to work for the financial gain, what would you want to do? All right, as you're jotting some of those down, I just wanted to share what I actually talked about with my wife. So some of the things for us is, we want a medium-sized home. We don't really want something really big. We want to be able to travel and work abroad extensively, be present with our kids when that day comes, hopefully, and also just be very present with our family, invest more into our fitness. I always joke, like, buy my wife the clothes that she wants to, but so what does this do, right? So it basically creates this lens to say, okay, well, the financial decisions that we're making today are going to help position us for X, Y, and Z in the future, right? So you're putting your life first and then having your money follow, right? One of the biggest mistakes I see people make is just say, well, I'm going to invest for retirement. I'm going to invest for retirement. But what does retirement mean to you, right? I've seen it before working one-on-one with clients where they got to retirement. They sacrificed their whole life. They were 65 years old, they had all this money, and then they got there and they're like, I don't know what to do now, right? It's sort of like climbing a ladder your whole life to realize it's leaning the wrong way, right? You don't want to be caught going down a path and not really know what it's for. So I love these questions. It just helps you spark, like, what is that money vision for you? Because then when you're more clear on what you're saving for in the first place, it makes a lot of those decisions much easier. Right, this is especially important to when you're married or if you're in a relationship. Many of you might know, like, money is the #1 cause of divorce. Well, why? It's because we're taught money's taboo. We don't talk about it, right? But it's a pure representation of your hard work, your values, your goals. So it's so important to really create that lens, right? Go through and say, what do you want your money to accomplish for you? What does that look like? What's important to you? It's not necessarily too about trying to maximize the amount of money you have. It's more about maximizing your life, right? In my experience working with high net worth clients in the past, I had some clients that had like $5 million, $10 million, but what they didn't have was, close relationships with their kids or work that they loved or the time to enjoy it. So I just want to share with you, it's not about trying to maximize all of that, right? It's what's unique to you, what do you value? And then you want to use money as a tool to help navigate properly and save the right way to give you that flexibility, give you that optionality as well. All right, also along these lines, the idea of retirement is totally changing. So on the blue over here is like the traditional retirement path. It used to be that we work 9 to 5, you work till age 65, you collect a pension, Social Security, and then you start doing everything, right? And this stems from the idea that most work used to be physical labor, which made sense, right? Like you couldn't work past a certain age because your body would give out. But now with internet technology and everyone's working remotely for the most part, we're able to redefine, quote unquote, like what retirement means to you, right? So that's why I put in the green here is how it's changing now, right? You don't really have to feel tied to a company your whole life anymore. You're able to work different places or work remotely, or Social Security is completely uncertain. Pensions don't really exist anymore. So I think there's more opportunity now to say, instead of saving and deferring your life all the way until 65, you're able to enjoy it more throughout your life. Now, the issue we'll talk about later is most of the accounts that you save into, they're still structured around this work until you're 65 and then pull out money concept, right? So if you have this type of mindset, you have to save in creative ways. So here's the, I call it the traditional work path, right? The blue is you work at 100% capacity, then you retire, and then you enjoy everything after that, right? But retirement's never guaranteed, right? I'm sure everyone's heard or has situations in their life where someone passed away young or they were diagnosed with something. So this is what I like to call is like the modern work path, right? So you actually work longer. This is what the green is, but maybe you have more breaks, or you just have different things in between, right? So that could mean, a sabbatical. It could mean changing jobs more. It could mean if you have kids and that's important to you, maybe you scale back work. But the idea here is that your life doesn't go in a straight line, right? Like you want to be really flexible with how you're saving and make sure you have that flexibility to save in different ways to support you with this, right? So for example, if you said, hey, like in my mid-20s, I want to take a 3-month sabbatical and go travel everywhere, right? That's awesome, right? But if you have all your money saved into some of the accounts we're going to talk through later, like an IRA or a 401k, you're going to pay huge tax and penalties by doing that, right? So you have to be creative with how you're saving as well. So this mindset shift, I don't know if anyone's heard of it before. It's called the FIRE movement. And what does that stand for? It stands for Financially Independent, Retire Early. Now, I don't really agree with like the RE part, but at its core, it means just using your money to do more of what you love and less of what you don't, right? So the idea here is, you can save a good amount of your money, especially early on in life, to give you flexibility to say, hey, what if later on I wanted to take a job that paid less, but I felt like was more aligned with my passions? Awesome, that's amazing, pursue that, right? Or you might say, hey, maybe I want to do something different. And that's what money does. It buys you flexibility, it buys you optionality, right? But it really matters how you're saving, because if you save back to that like traditional retirement structure, you're handcuffing yourself on how you can use some of that money. All right, so now we're gonna get into like how much should you save, where should you save? Now this is pretty gray, right? Like it's very subjective, it changes for different people, but I'm gonna give you a sense of some good rules of thumb to go with. So the first is, what is a good savings amount? And I tell my clients that they don't really like it, as much as you reasonably can, right? Not too much, not too little, right? It changes each year depending on what's going to happen in your life, but I do say there's typically a minimum amount that you want to target. So what I like to go by is the 50-30-20 rule, right? So here, let's use an example. Let's say you make $120,000 a year and you pay $20,000 in tax. So it equals $100,000 of your after-tax income. What this goes is you take 50% of that after-tax income, and that goes towards your needs here, right? So that's things like rent, mortgage, kids, food, utilities, right? 30% goes towards the things you want, right? So it's going out, your hobbies or travel, whatever that is for you. And then that 20% should be used toward your financial future, right? So that should either be investing, paying down debt. So this is a nice rule of thumb. It's sort of like a gut check that I talk to my clients about. If you're below that 20% threshold, then that should be a kind of a wake-up call to say, crap, I might need to make some changes in my life to make sure I am saving for the future. But at the same time, I've seen some clients that were saving, 60 to 70% of their income. And although that's great, I also like to challenge their mindset to say, well, what are some of those things that you value now? Like, what would it look like if you spent more on some of the areas you really like? Like, what would that do for you, whether it's a trip or investing into a hobby or a new skill or things like that? So that's why I like not too much and not too little. It's subjective, but I think the mindset there makes sense, where you want to feel balanced, where you are saving for the future. You always want to spend less than you make, but at the same time, you want to feel comfortable to say, I'm doing the things that I want to do in life and the things that I value, right? So once you actually get to the point, you figure out like, what can you save? I'm a huge fan of automating your savings, right? So you're able to set up automatic transfers from bank accounts, investment accounts, separating some account structures. I'm sure this has been talked about a lot here too. If you have everything in a checking account, it can be really challenging to just figure out like, what does that money actually mean, right? So a lot of my clients will have a checking account, they'll have an emergency savings account, which is different. They'll have a travel account, which is different too. So having that mental separation of money, it just makes it a lot easier to manage some of your behavior around that. One person said, why do you say retirement is unhealthy? Doesn't the 100% work capacity at 60 just breed bad work-life balance and thus lead to burnout? Great question. So what I think I was trying to say is it's unhealthy to work your entire life, have a purpose and everything, to then just say, I'm going to do nothing if you don't know what that nothing is, right? So that's where, instead of going that whole path, what I'm really seeing with a lot of clients and new people coming into this is more around, okay, I want to work hard, but I also want to make sure that I'm having breaks along the way, right? It's sort of like running a marathon instead of running a really, really quick sprint. And at the end of it, you're like, oh crap, I'm done, right? So life's a marathon. You want to enjoy the ride too, right? But I have seen, and there is a lot of data to support it, to say the people that actually got to retirement, if they were lucky enough to make the financial decisions that did it, their happiness actually went down because they didn't have fulfillment, they didn't have passion, they didn't really know what they were retiring to, right? You want to retire to something, you don't want to retire from something. So as long as you're able to fill in like what that gap is, I think that's great. But it's sort of the concept of, you don't want to defer everything in your life until an uncertain future at age 65 too. All right, So here's what I typically recommend as a savings hierarchy. Shout out to any of my Breaking Bad fans that might get this. The first time I ever presented at Harvard, I got complete silence when I showed this, and I was so disappointed. I'm hoping some people get this reference, but here's a pretty common savings hierarchy that I like to recommend, right? So step one is an emergency fund. Like I call this the oh shit fund. It's just easier to say it like that. But it's like money that you have on hand in case, you know, a pet needs surgery or you lose a job or your car needs fixing, right? Kind of like those oh crap, oh shit moments. So a lot of people that I recommend, it's around 3 to 6 months of expenses, right? When you think about holding cash, it's pretty subjective. There is an objective part, which is that 3 to 6, but also the subjective part is what makes you feel safe, right? So money is also very emotional. Some people might feel like seeing a lot of money in their bank account makes them feel safe and makes them feel secure. I place a lot of weight on that too, but I think starting with that 3 to 6 months to say, you know, if you're spending $5,000 a month, the minimum amount you'd want to have is roughly $15,000 just at all times. That's not something that's invested in a market or crypto or anything like that. Please, God, do not put your emergency fund in crypto. I know some people might do that. Have it in just like a high yield bank account that's nice and safe, right? So then to say that you have that filled up, then you go to step two and say, you know, are there any other, you know, higher paying, higher yielding debts that you can pay down, especially credit card, right? So if you have any credit card debt, you're likely paying somewhere between 12 to 20% interest, and paying that down is like a guaranteed rate of return, right? Really, really powerful. You're likely not going to get that anywhere else in the market. Number three is to contribute the minimum amount to your 401k, 403b to get the match, right? So a lot of employers will say, hey, you know, if you put in a certain amount, we'll match you up to 3 or 4 or 5%, sometimes 2. That's 100% return your money right away. Really, really valuable to do. The next one I typically talk about is maxing out your Roth IRA. I'm a huge fan of Roth IRAs. You're basically able to put money in after tax. That money grows tax-free for the rest of your life. But you also have the flexibility to take the contributions out at any point, right? So let's say you put, you know, $6,000 into account, it grows to $10,000. That $6,000 you can take out whenever you want, go to Vegas, do whatever you want. The IRS isn't going to ask any questions. It's that $4,000 of earnings that there's some rules around. So I'm a big fan of Roth because it's tax efficient, but because you don't pay tax again, but also you have that flexibility to still use that fund. Once you get past that, it really gets subjective. It's specific to your situation. So, you know, you could pay down more debt, you could invest, you could put more into your 401k. This is totally customized, but hopefully this guideline is a good starting point for you. So one person asked, I've heard of options where one can take out retirement funds early if they retire before 65. Can you talk more about that? Great question. So there are some loopholes that you can do. One is called, super technical, it's called like 72T, which basically means it's this provision to say if you take out money spread out over a certain amount of time, you can take it out of your retirement accounts before penalty. But most retirement accounts, and we'll talk through some of that in a little bit, if you take it out before age 60, you pay a 10% penalty. So it's pretty steep, but there are loopholes to get around that. Getting into that is a little bit too in the weeds, but we'll talk about some of the accounts that you can do to get past that. Someone else asked, which is I think very applicable for this, what are some high yield savings accounts that you recommend for students starting out? Some really good ones. I like Ally. They have about 0.5% interest that you can have. There's other ones like Marcus, Goldman Sachs, oh, that is Goldman Sachs. Citi has another one. You can something called bankrate.com. You can go there and see some of the higher yielding funds there. But there are a bunch that they don't pay you a ton, but they do pay you a little bit more than a local checking account or a local credit union. We're going to go more about the 401k and the IRA in a little bit. Okay. So now when you get into actually saving, like how do you start? And this chart is really, really important because it pays off so much. The earlier you can start investing, it really, really matters. And I love this because it shows the top line shows investing $5,000 per year from age 25 to 65. So in total, he invested $200,000 and it grew to over 1.1 million. right? Pretty powerful. The next one, the middle line, shows investing $5,000 per year from age 25 to 35. In total, she invests, I think, $50,000 and grows to $600,000. Still pretty powerful, right? The bottom one shows investing $5,000 from age 35 to 65. So there's a 10-year lag on when they start. And that grows to about $540,000. But I think the key here is the difference between the middle line and the bottom line. The middle line shows in total investing $50,000, but starting 10 years sooner. The bottom line shows total investing $150,000, but starting 10 years later. The middle line actually comes out on top, right? That's the power of compound interest, is the earlier you get going, the more your money is going to grow, and then it grows on top of that. So it really does make sense to save as much as you can early, but again, you want to have that balance along the way too. So here, like someone asked a question about IRAs versus 401ks. I'll probably cover that here, but I love the concept of bucketing your money. So you'll see in here at the very top are pre-tax and Roth accounts. Think of those as like 15-year plus money. That means like time horizon, meaning like I wouldn't want to use those funds for 15 years. It's probably for the future. And when you have more time that you can invest, you can obviously invest more aggressively, right? Because it's never a straight line. In the investment market, it's a really bumpy road. I'm sure you'll go through that with some of these sessions. But then a middle bucket that we talk about, we call it like the flexibility bucket, right? Let's just say, for example, that you want to start saving for a home right now, but you're probably not going to be buying for the next 5 years. Then maybe you don't just keep it in the high yield savings account. That's where an account called a taxable account or a brokerage account comes in, because with those, and you can set those up, same thing with an IRA or any of these, there's some big financial custodians called Fidelity, Vanguard, Schwab, Betterment, like all these different companies where you can go and it's really easy to open up one of these accounts and start investing, right? But you wouldn't want to put money for a home in something like a pre-tax account that you can't touch for 15 years, right? So you want to be sure that how you're investing your money and what accounts you go in is also aligned with your values in your life too, right? So that's why I like this chart as a guide to think about. So money that is truly way off in the future, you can invest more aggressively, but 0 to 5 year money, if you're planning on buying a home in the next year, it makes no sense to try to put that into something that's going to grow or go down a lot, right? You want to match your time horizon with how you're investing too. So here are the savings options. There's a big chart here, a lot of information. I'm going to go through it pretty quick. Anything in blue is taxable money, and think taxable money equals flexibility. There's no IRS rules, no penalties, no restrictions for how you want to use it. So you can open up a taxable account at any of those financial institutions that I mentioned earlier. And it's a really good way for you to just maintain flexibility here, right? And I sort of strip that out of more than 5 years. That's where you can start thinking about investing. If it's less than 5 years, you might want to keep it in your bank account there. But that's sort of like that middle bucket that we talked about. The green over here, those are offered by employers. These are mostly pre-tax accounts. The most common are 401ks, 403bs. Sometimes you might get equity compensation if you work at a startup or you work at a tech company or publicly traded too. But these are going to be, if you go work at a job, it's most likely that these are going to be offered, right? So you can invest in the green and the blue at the same time. They're not mutually exclusive in any way whatsoever, right? And they come with different pros and cons. The yellow at the bottom, these are pension plans. It's pretty rare if you have one. If you work for a government agency or maybe a defense company, you'll get them. They used to be really, really popular, right? And almost now, no companies really offer that. And then the red are IRAs, right? So again, the green and the yellow is all through your employers. The blue and the red is all you, right? They're individual accounts. So with IRAs, there's the Roth IRA where, again, you put money in, it's tax-free for the rest of your life, but you don't get any tax benefit up front, versus a traditional IRA. You put money in and you get a tax deduction for it up front, so you do pay a little bit less of tax, but then you owe tax later on. So here are like all the options, but one of the key points I wanted to stress too is it likely makes sense for you to save in some of these different buckets. Like I wouldn't want to put everything in the green, I wouldn't want to put everything in the blue. That relates back to this chart, right? Because you can see where you want to be bucketing your money according to when you actually want to use it at the same time. Awesome. So one person asked, do these suggestions also apply for international context or only for the US? This is more around the US. Jane is definitely going to be covering more in depth around savings options if you do live internationally. So diving a little bit deeper into the Roth section, I think you're going to get these slides after, but as we talked about, you put money in, it grows tax-free. There's the flexibility that you can take money out at any point too. So it's a great way to be saving for your future. There are some income limits that I'm not going to get into now, but if you make above a certain amount, you can't contribute directly to it. Versus a traditional IRA, I've always used the analogy, it's sort of like going to a bar. A Roth IRA is like paying a cover charge up front and then you drink for free once you get in. But a traditional IRA, it's like you don't pay anything up front, but then you pay for every drink, right? At some point, you're going to pay the cost, and each one is specific to what you actually want there. But I would typically say when you're younger, a Roth IRA usually makes more sense because you're able to get more of the tax-free growth, more earnings in the future, especially if you anticipate your tax rate going up. All right, so I'm going to wrap up here. Just in the interest of time, I'll pause too for a minute before we shift over and go to Jane because she has some awesome material that she's going to cover. But what are some of the key takeaways, right? Like, what should you think about? How can you bring this home? Number one, I can't stress this enough. It's just don't build your savings without building your life, right? Get clear on your values, know what you want your money to do for you so you can create that path, right? And I wouldn't just say, save for retirement, like try to paint the picture and be like, oh, I want to do X, Y, and Z in my career. I want to take this trip, or I want to buy a home here. Sort of fill that in so you know what that path is. Feel free to be different. Like I know Magdalia put in an article that was recently in where, my wife and I actually went to Antarctica instead of buying a home, right? And it's like that we felt like that was more aligned with what we value. Is that the decision that's going to maximize our net worth? Hell no. Like at buying a home, you get equity, but a trip you don't, obviously, right? But we did it in a financially responsible way. It's something that's not going to dramatically change our financial future, but we felt like it was really aligned. Like we didn't want to wait until quote unquote retirement to go do that. Number three, definitely start saving, but do it in the right way, right? Give yourself that flexibility that you can look at your money and say, especially in those taxable accounts with the Roth, and use it before age 60 or whenever you can start using it. Also match your investment horizon, right? So don't keep your emergency fund in crypto. I'm a very crypto friendly advisor. I believe in blockchain and all of that. It has nothing to do with that, but don't do it because it's so much risk in such a short time horizon, right? So emergency funds should be kept in cash, but longer term money you can certainly take more risk with. And then lastly is just track your spending, right? Like I always say, track spending equals awareness. It's not around shame or blame. It's just making sure that you're making decisions that you feel like is aligned with some of your values and what you want longer term. So I'm going to shift over to Jane now, but if you want to get in touch with us, so you can go visit our website, www.experienceyourwealth.com. I'm also on LinkedIn if you just search Jake Northrup. My Facebook is okay. My Instagram is getting a little better too. But I try to share different things related to educational content and other things that might be applicable to you as well. So I'm going to stop sharing here and then shift it over to Jane.
I'm just trying to get my screen up. Let me know if you can see my screen.
Hey, Jane, we can see it.
Okay. Do you see the presentation or do you see the slides?
We see the presentation view, so the slide and then also the next slide. So
okay, so let me swap that out so you guys don't have to worry about that. Yeah. Okay, how's that?
Perfect.
Okay, great. Thank you. And thank you so much for the intro right at the beginning. The thing I really want to do is kind of build up on what Jake just talked about and think about, okay, I want to save for the future, but if I'm foreign born, what are some of the things that I need to think about? So when we do some of these things, we always have to put in some disclosures before you take action on any of this, make sure you talk to your financial advisor, your CPA, or your legal person, okay? So in terms of what we're going to talk about, really, like I said, it's really what it means to be foreign born and saving in the US. And by the end of this, maybe 20 minutes presentation, what I'm hoping to be able to do is actually give you a framework that you can use, or a set of questions that you can use anytime you're trying to evaluate an investment or an investment vehicle. I'm not talking about what's inside the investment, but I'm talking about some of the accounts that Jake talked about. So one thing I do want to point out is I am on an immigrant journey, which I think a few of you are on too. It was probably maybe about, I don't know, when I was maybe 23, 24, my parents bought me a one-way ticket, escorted me to the airport and said, okay, Jane, bye-bye. Off you go to go pursue your American dream. And I actually landed in Logan, Logan Airport. And so since then, I've gone through being an F1 student, being on a student visa, then getting onto an H1 visa, and then a green card, and then a US citizen. So I completely understand what it means to be international in the country, and sometimes not really having people give you the right financial advice. And that's some of what I'm hoping we're able to help you with. And really, that was my whole reason for starting Algon Financial Advisors. So when I work with clients and or prospects, I walk them through the framework that I'm going to describe or that I'm going to talk to you about. And the framework, like I said, is a set of questions. And so the way things go is the first question I always want to know is, what's your tax residency status? And I will talk about that briefly. And then I'll ask, what's your legal immigration status? And this surprises people when folks realize that actually your tax residency status is not the same as your immigration status, which leads to some things like you could have somebody in the country who's undocumented, who's illegal, and yet they are a tax resident. And then I'll ask the question, what's your long-term residency plans? Are you planning on staying in the US? And if not, are you planning on, what country are you planning on moving back to, especially when you withdraw the money? And the reason why this is so critical is we have probably about 70 countries that have tax treaties with the US, and that does affect what you can do with some of the accounts that you have here. At the same time, you may have countries whose tax rate is lower than the US, so it may be beneficial for you to take the money out when you're there. So there are all these kind of questions that we ask before we can get down to what makes sense. If you're a green card holder, which is a dream of many immigrants, I want to know, do you plan on giving up this green card at some point? It's probably a question we should have asked at the beginning before you actually got the green card, because there are some financial implications for giving up your permanent residency. And then, of course, I want to know what your financial ties are to your home country. What assets do you own over there? As far as the US tax system goes, one of the things that surprises people is to find out that the US taxes you on worldwide income. It is the only country in the world to do this. Other countries tax you based on your residency. And so what the implications of this are is you could be, let's say, in Uganda or China, or you could be on the moon, and yet the IRS is very, very interested in what your income is over there once you've been defined as a tax resident. And I'm using the term US persons as well. As far as tax residency, it's the same thing. And so that's something we really, really have to watch out for. The other thing that happens with this whole worldwide income is there are some, obviously, tax implications, some tax compliance rules that we have to follow, including some things called like an FBAR form that you have to fill out. Now, the IRS put all these things in place really to prevent financial crime, people hiding money overseas, unfortunately, it ends up affecting the rest of us, but it's something you really want to be aware of. So the big question, are you a tax resident or not? Obviously, if you're a US citizen, you are a tax resident. The question then applies really to people who are non-US citizens, and there's two tests, and you just have to pass one of them. The first test is, are you a green card holder? They call that the green card test. If you're a green card holder, then yes, you are a tax resident. The next question is what they call the substantial presence test. They use some formulas to calculate the number of days you've been in the country. So if you've been in the country for more than 183 days over a 3-year period, then you're considered to be a tax resident. I will have to point out that if you're on a student visa, so F, let's say J visa, M, or Q visa, you have to wait for 5 calendar years before you start counting on the 183 days. And there are a few more exemptions that apply, but these are really the main ones. So once you're a tax non-resident, remember, if you're tax resident, you're treated just like a US citizen. You do have to pay taxes on income earned in the US if you're a tax non-resident. That means you fail those 2 tests. And the issue with this is you really can't claim like the standard deduction and a few other deductions. But at the same time, you don't have to pay FICA or Social Security taxes. So there are pros and cons. And of course, you have to file taxes each year. You have an income, and you have to declare your exempt status every year. One big advantage of being a tax non-resident is you don't have to report foreign assets. Now, there's one interesting situation that applies to people where you're called what you refer to as a dual status alien, and I use the word alien because that's what IRS uses, where part of the year you're non-resident and part of the year you're resident. In this case, my suggestion is make sure you work with a CPA when it comes to filing your taxes. So using the framework, what I'm gonna do is talk through a few examples of some of the accounts that Jake has described and kind of put them through the lenses of being foreign born, can I use these accounts or not? Now, one thing I do want to point out is for all intent and purposes, you can open any of these accounts. So you're not really prohibited from doing that as long as you meet things like the income requirements and that kind of thing. So let's start with a Roth because everybody loves a Roth. I love Roths, but it really could be a great investment or it could be a nightmare depending on where you're coming from. Again, you can open a Roth IRA account if you have earned US income. Now, what happens is, remember I talked about a tax treaty. The US has about, there's about 70 countries that has tax treaties with the US. And out of that, there's probably about 8 countries that actually call out the tax-free status of a Roth account. So if you're going to be moving back to one of those 8 countries, and we can talk about those countries, then it probably makes sense to leave your money in the Roth account. On the other hand, if your country that you're going to be moving back to does not recognize the tax-free status of the Roth account, in Germany is one example that comes to mind, they will end up taxing that account as a normal investment account. Other countries end up taxing it as a foreign pension. So in that case, I may say it may not be the best option for you, but it really is going to come down to what country you're going to be moving back to when you're planning on withdrawing the money. Another example is 401k in IRAs. Again, if your employer gives you this option, absolutely, you can go ahead and open these accounts. And it's okay to leave the accounts to continue growing, although it may depend on the custodian who's holding your money. But what happens is when you're ready to withdraw the money, the US will put a 30% mandatory withholding, again, if there's no tax treaty between the US and the country that you're moving back to. So again, we want to keep that in mind as we take this into consideration. And one of the tough things about the 401k account is, remember, when you're ready to withdraw the money at retirement, for example, you do end up having to file taxes, right? Because that's how they know how much to tax you on this. This does mean, unfortunately, even though you've left, you will be needing to file taxes. So again, something to keep in mind. Another example, and I kind of like this, is a brokerage account. If you're in the US and you're non-resident, the US will only tax you on, capital gains tax if you've been in the country for more than 183 days. So let's say you're a student, you came into the country last year, and you've only been in the country you're going to be in the country for 180 days, and you end up opening a brokerage account, you're not going to pay any capital gains tax on this account. The beauty about this is when you leave, this is the one account where, again, the US does not make you pay taxes on the capital gains tax. So that's something to really keep in mind, especially when you're not sure how long you're going to be around. Another example is when it comes to dividends and interest, and again, it all depends on the account that's holding this. The US, once again, wants a 30% tax rate on the dividend, but if there's some sort of a tax treaty, this can be lowered. And again, depending on the country that you're going to be going to, you may be able to recover some of these via tax credits in your home country. And so keep that framework in mind as you consider the account that you're looking into, how long you think you're going to be here, and again, what it is that you want to do with your money. All right, so I'm going to stop right there. I know this is a little bit technical, and I'll see if we got any questions. Okay, let's see. I see a question here, and Jake, this could be one of us, either of us can do this. At what point do you recommend someone works with a financial advisor as well as just doing these steps and making investments on your own? Jake, you want to take that one?
Sure. Well, I think what you're all doing right now is an amazing first step. Is first just get education, feel comfortable with the baseline. I've always used the analogy working with a financial planner versus doing your own. It's sort of like doing a home renovation where you can look at YouTube videos, you can read all of it, but at the end of the day, you're probably not going to do as good of a job, and it's going to be frustrating. But some people are naturally gifted; they like doing it. That's awesome, right? Others might feel like, you know what, this is a really important part. I want to outsource it. So I think when you're just starting out getting invested, you can certainly, some financial planners offer like a one-time engagement where you can meet with them, they'll give you instructions, you can go implement it, that's great. There are other really good platforms like LVEST, which is specifically around helping women invest. There's other things like Betterment for advisors, Wealthfront, like all these that you can get a really cost-effective way to work with someone. I think working with someone more comprehensive, like either of us or someone else, it's usually more like life event driven. So if you're getting married or you got a new job, or there's more complexity happening in your life, that's usually where working with a financial planner that really knows you makes the most sense. But there's a lot of good platforms, and Jane, feel free to chime in there too. I can drop some resources in the chat for people too.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. But when it comes to some of these international things, it may be worth just doing even just a 1 hour consultation with somebody, just so you don't make mistakes at the beginning. I think, Jake, you've done a good job summarizing this. I see a question: how do we find information on which countries have tax treaties with the US and for what areas? this information is all on the IRS website, but what I can do is I can send some links to Sarah if you want to take a look at some of that. That'll probably be helpful. I'm happy to do that.
And I just dropped two of the resources I mentioned in the chat. I'm also going to put in a second. If you wanted to work, those are great, like do it yourself combined with technology platforms. If you're looking for like someone like Jane, that's such a specialty and expertise, right? Like you're not going to get that. That's where you probably want to work with someone that has that in your specific situation. In a second, I'll drop some resources in case you ever did want to find out where to work with one. We will say like what we are very biased but think is best is to say work with a fee-only financial planner. And what that means is they don't sell any insurance or have any hidden costs or commissions. They just get paid from you and have a legal obligation to act in your best interest. So if you're ever looking for someone, we highly recommend like asking, are you a fiduciary? And then also look for things like the CFP or look for some of that expertise as well.
I'm dropping a link on tax treaty tables, and I have to admit I spent a lot of time on the IRS website because this is really the only way to figure out, you know, what countries will allow you to do what. And again, my links are up here. If you have questions, as Jake said, we're more than happy to keep talking through this. So.
I think too, it's interesting. Sometimes we forget that retirement, you know, the different types of retirement accounts are all kind of listed within a tax code. It's part of tax code, right? So it's interesting to note that we spend a lot of time on the IRS website when we're thinking about retirement, and that isn't always the first thing that comes to mind. We have some time for additional questions, so continue using the Q&A feature for questions that you have either for Jake or for Jane. And definitely keep using those, but just want to give a shout out to our next session as well. We've been talking a little bit about investing here, specifically for retirement and for the future, but we will be doing a deeper dive into investing, less of the retirement sense and more of that fun money sense in our next session at 1:15. We'll have a quick screen break, but it'll be at the same link, so don't hesitate to get on back for that one. We'll be with Shahar during that session, and we'll be glad to have you back. So any questions that come up, please put them in the Q&A. And this is on the same Zoom link, so don't forget that. You'll have it right there in your email. But Jake, I think one of the questions that I have is something that I think about each year when we hear this presentation. I definitely want to be a part of the mini retirement plan. My boss is not so much on board. So when you're finding these opportunities, kind of where do you find that balance? Is it always about working for yourself, or is it, you know, taking breaks in between the different jobs that you have? What does that balance look like?
Yeah, such a good question. And a lot of people feel the same way where many employers, there are some, especially the tech companies, that are now saying after a certain amount of time, like a 5-year mark, they'll give you an extended time off. But what we've said too is if you're thinking about a job change at any point in the future, right, maybe just ask the intentional question of, is that an opportunity if you wanted to take a break in between, like maybe you do that, right? And then you have savings that are allocated specifically for that during that time period, right? I highly doubt that someone's not going to hire you if it's a highly competitive and you're the right person. If you say, I'll be there, but I want to be doing this thing before that, right? Or you even say, I'm going to go do this and look for a job when I get back. But I think some of those natural transitions that happen in life, like just ask that question, say, is this a good time for me to do it? Because it can be challenging once you add in kids or some of the more obligations and different things there too, right? But you know, I've seen some people too just go to their employer and say, this is something that's important to me. Like, can I just take unpaid leave and will I still have my job when I'm back if I do everything, right? So, you know, doing that, you might need to be comfortable if they say no, like what you have a plan, but think about what's the worst case scenario. Think about that, go through that, and then say, am I comfortable with that versus some of the benefits that could come from it?
You. A great question. As advisors, what are some expectations versus realities that you deal with, or any myth busters that you've found when working with clients?
Jane, do you want to start with that one, and I can chime in?
Yeah, so because of the folks that I work with, I have a lot of people, let's say like on student visa coming in, they're saying, oh, we've been told we shouldn't be filing taxes, or we've been told we shouldn't be paying taxes. So, and I have to correct them and say, Ashley, no, you do have to file taxes. You do have to file taxes as a non-resident, and you should be okay. You shouldn't be afraid to do that. Another thing I find that's always interesting is people say, oh, let's say when they start working and they're having to pay, especially their residents, they're having to pay Social Security, and they're like, why am I paying this? And I'm going to leave it behind. And I tell them, actually, it doesn't matter where you end up going to, as long as you paid Social Security in the US, believe it or not, you will be able to get your Social Security when you move out. So those kind of things. So just trying to get them to not be afraid to save and really continue doing it. There will be places where they have to pay some taxes, but we pay taxes everywhere. We just have to be smart about it.
Gene, I've learned so much from you in this 20 minutes. I was literally jotting down notes as you were talking, so thank you for all that. Yeah, I think that's a great point. I'll say for some of the clients that we work with, I think people come with the expectation that money is rational, money makes sense, money can fit into a spreadsheet. But actually, when you understand it more, as I mentioned earlier, money is a pure representation of your hard work, your values, and your goals and everything that you put into it. Yet society and everything tells us don't talk about it. Like, those are two big barriers hitting each other. So I think that can sometimes be surprising, is when you start to peel back some of the layers, especially if you have a partner or a spouse that you're managing money with together. I think seeing that and having that expectation that this isn't just rational, like there are things behind that, and feeling like you want to be open to those conversations. I think that's one of the most important things, but we don't learn it because we don't learn this stuff in school. You guys are fortunate that Migdalia and Sarah in the program do really prioritize financial literacy and education, but the vast majority of the population don't have that in the first place. And then also combine it with, we have zero clue how to communicate. And I think that's something that really shocks people at times too.
Thank you. Yeah, I think there are so many things in this world, if we just talked about them a little bit more, that maybe it'd go over smoother later in life, for sure. And one last question that I think we'll end up with, I really love this one. They say, thanks so much for the presentation. They're curious what inspired you both to become financial advisors and what that journey was like to become a financial advisor.
I'm still on that journey. That's the way I look at it. But really, what got me started down this path was when I moved to this country. I was born in Kenya, and my parents were very proactive about teaching us about finances. But when I got here, I realized this was like speaking a completely different language. That was the first thing. And then I ended up, like I said, getting a job on an H-1 visa, and the company had a 401k plan. And I remember looking at it and almost being in tears because I had no idea what the heck they were talking about. So that really got me started, wanting to learn as much as I can. And the fact that I was on a visa, it meant I would go to people and they'll be like, oh, I don't know what you do with that when it comes to visas. And I'm like, there's going to be a ton of people that are going through the same issue. There's over 40 million immigrants in this country. And so that really was my big why. If I'm having all these questions and I've nobody to answer them, then maybe I should just jump into it and go all out. And like I said, I was in the high-tech industry. I was settled. I'd done a lot in this space, but this just felt right. So the short version of the journey is go back to school, get my CFP, get a couple certificates, work with some companies, lots of learning, lots of reading, the IRS. I love reading that website. And like I said, here I am still helping as much as I can and still learning.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think what you'll find too is everyone's whys on what they get in. It's usually related to some personal story. Like there's some motivation there. And personally, for me, it came down to my dad actually passed away suddenly when he was 63. I was 21 years old at the time, and he was totally healthy, everything, literally about to retire, and then that happens. It just shakes you up, right? I'm sure, like seeing some of what I'm talking about. You just never know what's certain for the future. But then I thought, okay, I'm going to take that experience of being through something like that myself, have it in my life about what I'm learning from it, but then also just helping to educate others. And then the way that you can do that is money, to be honest. It's like, if you need this, you need the right decisions to help support you. So that obviously had a big impact on my life. And then similar to Jane too, it's just, we just love helping people, right? You're able to see the impact, see people's relationship with their money improve, see them help do things in their life. And whether that's, making an immigrant feel less confused already being in this country with everything else going on, or whether it's someone to say, hey, I always wanted to do this in my life and now I'm able to do it because I'm saving towards it. Like, it's just such impactful things. And then I think we also secretly behind the scenes kind of nerd out because you have to be a specific type of person to read IRS websites for fun. And that's kind of what we do.
Extremely true. I don't know if I could ever find myself reading the IRS website for fun, but that sounds exactly like something that you two would do. And I'm glad there are people like that for us. Thank you both so much, Jake and Jane, for a great presentation. It was really a time of learning for all of us, including myself, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what folks have to say about it.